All right, so where do we leave off? That seems like that was like a year or a year and a half ago or something. I think I look like 10 years older. Okay, so we left off in the story where me and my buddies had sold our technology company, Reliant. It wasn't a giant win, but it was a significant win, right? And we decided that the smart play is to take all of that money and roll it on a game company. So originally there were 5 of us. It was me and Joseph, my college roommate, 2 of my buddies from high school who were gaming buddies, James and Pat, and Robert, who was a technology guy from my previous tools company. So that was the original 5 founders. 5 founders is actually a lot, as it turns out, but we didn't know that. So the idea behind even the company, right, the name Wolfpack was, this is how we thought it would be cool to run a company. Like, instead of running the company with this big org chart where people reported to people, what if we just ran it like a pack of wolves? Like, we were all hungry to make something great, but we were also self-sufficient. We just go kick ass doing whatever our individual role was, and somehow it all come together. That's actually not a great way to manage a company, and it doesn't scale. Like, with a small group, maybe that'll work. Once you get up to 30 or 40 people, it's a nightmare. We didn't know that yet, though, so at the time, Wolfpack Studios it is. We just jumped into this with a, how hard could it be kind of idea, and the answer, as it turns out, spoiler alert, is it's incredibly challenging. We didn't just set out to make any game, right? Like, we didn't set out to make a small game or even a text-based game, which we had some experience doing. We decided that our first game should be an MMO. I don't even think MMOs was an acronym back then. Like, it was just online games, right? I think maybe we called them virtual worlds or something, but the idea of it being a massively multiplayer online game, that wasn't a concept. At least it wasn't a marketing term anybody had ever heard of. It wasn't a genre. Ultima Online was live, EverQuest was in beta, so this idea of a virtual world, like an online connected experience, it just didn't really exist. It was a new thing, at least at mass. Like the idea of that you could really make money doing this, that was a new concept. So you gotta remember, none of us had ever made a game professionally before. The closest we'd gotten to making a game was back in college running text-based MUDs. MUDs are the precursor to MMOs. Like, on the evolutionary tree, it goes tabletop gaming like D&D to text-based gaming, where it's not really massively multiplayer. You got like 50 or 100 people in the same universe at the same time. It's basically a mini version of an MMO, so I guess you'd call it an MO. No graphics. Like, literally, if you want to pick up the longsword, you type pick up the longsword, and it says you pick up the longsword. The basic concept of the game, though, is really similar. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we have now in MMOs originally came from those text-based game days. Like, monsters are called mobs, right? Why? Because the guys in Copenhagen who wrote the code for the original Daiku MUD called them mobiles. I don't know why, but they were mobs for short. So even now, we call them mobs, not monsters. You know, respawning as a mechanic, rent as a mechanic, PvP flags on and off as a mechanic, all that came from the text-based days. So we had this belief that because we were experts at text-based games, well, how much harder could it be to slap graphics on top? That's completely false, by the way. So coming at it from a text-based gaming background, you could literally hack a new race or class into the game like over a weekend, because all you had to do was write, all right, Minotaur, all right, Centaur. Moving that over to graphics, it takes you, I don't know, a couple man-years to make one of those things. So Shadowbane, we completely oversold what we were able to deliver, and we didn't even know that until we were maybe halfway through the project.
Shadowbane is a online massively multi-user game set in a dark fantasy world.
So the original idea for Shadowbane actually came from a couple of different areas. One of those was Braveheart, the movie, right? A bunch of barbarians basically fighting each other in clan wars. Another was this largely unknown series of books called Song of Ice and Fire, which of course now everybody knows is Game of Thrones, but at the time it wasn't a thing. The idea of going opposite of Ultima Online, which was really popular at the time, with a game that instead of being about, the avatar and virtues, at least that's what it was supposed to be, being heroic and courageous and being generous and all these things, instead taking the opposite tack and making a game where we encouraged villainy and treachery and backstabs and betrayal, that really resonated with people. Like that somehow it was the right vision at the right time. The moment we put together the name Shadowbane with this very dark and gritty site that had tarot cards on it, and it looked very bloody and brutal, and the whole pitch was, you don't have to try to be somebody great. You can kind of just be whoever you want to be in this gritty world. It really immediately took off with kind of a life of its own.
So while I was running Ultima Online back in 1999-2000, I started hearing about this game called Shadowbane. And they had this great catchphrase where they said, "We don't play games to bake bread, we play games to crush." And I thought that was really catchy. It did appeal to a subset of our audience on Ultima Online. But I thought the idea was a little crazy because they were going for just a fragment of our total audience. But at the same time, it was a really great marketing approach. And I finally got to meet Todd for the first time when I went to CES and saw Shadowbane for the first time, the game. And I did play it when it came out. And he was crazy, and he still is crazy.
So we started to pick up some momentum, and as we did it, we were learning how to make games. We were learning how to do 3D programming, learning how to build art assets. We were kind of putting the team together and the pieces together to really make a run for this. We didn't have much more at that time than, our ideas and a website. I don't even think we had an office. And already we started with no marketing spend, just amassing email registrations. Like, people were actively pinging us going, "I want to play this game. How do I play this game? How can I see more?" The idea of the game is catching and spreading from one person to the next entirely virally.
We have hundreds of large-scale guilds, armies, and nations that are already formed in anticipation of this game.
This was back when viral wasn't a thing. So we're amassing now hundreds and later thousands of email signups per week of people who want to play this game that still is really just in its infancy. Like, we're trying to figure out how we're going to put this whole thing together. So once we started to get some real momentum, we also started to burn through all that money that we brought to the table. I mean, we didn't have that much. About the time we started to run out of our seed funding that we put in ourselves, we started to get calls from publishers. That really started a whole new chapter for us. So Shadowbane, to this day, I think, holds the record for most publishers ever to belong to a single project that actually made it into the market. So first, we were contacted by a company called Quasiworld, who just liked our vision and wanted to bring it to Asia. So we signed a deal with Quasiworld to bring Shadowbane over to Asia. That deal got us enough attention that a company called Conspiracy Entertainment contacted us and said, "Hey, we'd like to do the same thing to bring Shadowbane to Europe." So now that we had Europe and Asia signed, that money allowed us to build enough of a demonstrable prototype to attract an actual North American publisher. So Gathering Developers contacted us. As it turned out, I had gone to high school with one of the principals over there. So we got along really, really well with them, and that deal almost immediately just came together really perfectly, right? Great cultural fit. They really got it. Unfortunately, that company got bought by Take-Two, and those guys didn't get it. Didn't go to high school with any of them, didn't really have the cultural fit. So they decided very quickly that they didn't want to be in the MMO business. And so abruptly we found ourselves without a North American publisher. And so we went to find a new one, and that's when Ubisoft came to the picture. Then at some point subsequent to that, Quasiworld went out of business, and we ended up reselling the Asian rights to a company called Intrans. Conspiracy Entertainment, for reasons kind of unrelated to us, also went out of business. Intrans then got swallowed by a company called E1 Media, which I think is now our 6th publisher in line. And then E1 Media went out of business and those rights got picked up by Ubisoft. And that meant Europe was now open. So at that point, Ubisoft just kind of consumed Wolfpack, consumed Europe, and they owned Shadowbane across the entire world. I think at final count, it was something like 7 publishers to get from inception of the product all the way to launch. Shadowbane had, looking back now, Tremendous vision that I'm still very proud of. There's a lot of things about the project that I would do completely differently, knowing what I know now. We didn't know what we were getting into from a project management standpoint. We came into the space with a tremendous amount of arrogance. Like we took this basic tack of game designers, professional game developers, they don't know what they're doing. We know how to make software and we play these games more than they do. So we really know what makes them work. The presumption there, of course, is that designers and developers don't play games, which is ridiculous. Like you wouldn't work your way into this industry and deal with the long hours and the lower pay and stuff like that if you didn't love games. But anyway, it made for a great pitch, and at the time we thought we didn't know what we didn't know. Quite frankly, it is sheer tenacity and a stubborn unwillingness to give up that got that product shipped at all. Shadowbane was basically like the Rocky Balboa of MMOs. Like it would get knocked down and you would think, well, they lost another publisher, or they lost some key employees, or hey, looks like they're going to be sued for some reason. There were any number of points where it took a bullet that I thought, like, this company is dead. But we just would not let that happen. Like we were just dogged in our determination that it didn't matter what the hell else happened to our lives, to our families, we were going to ship that game. And it did. It sold like right out of the gate. It popped up, I think, number 3 on the top 10 bestsellers list, and it lasted there for a couple weeks, and then the fall off started. The game just frankly wasn't done. Like at the point of launch, the game was buggy, there wasn't enough content, there were some fundamental design flaws that I wish I'd have seen. I think that I see them now and know how to address them. At the time, I certainly didn't. And unfortunately, the team had killed themselves just to get the game over the finish line. So right then, when the flames are kind of erupting around us and everything is really hard, that's when I needed the team to be fresh and ready to kind of tackle everything, and we were just exhausted. After 2 years of being consistently picked as the most anticipated upcoming game, it just didn't work. Like the vision was great, and there were key moments where the game would come together, and you'd have a moment in the game that, quite frankly, I've never felt anything like it. Like the dynamic nature of the world, the fact that the world was really in the player's hands. Every now and then that magic would break through, like the sunlight shining through the thunderclouds, and you would see it, and it was amazing. And then the clouds would roll back in, and it would be smothered by a sea of bugs, and the whole thing would collapse. So looking back on it, Shadowbane was an exercise in kind of triumph and tragedy, and I've been now for, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, I've been haunted by the idea of what could have been with this game. If we could have gotten those moments to happen repeatedly, without bugs, without lag, without all those issues, it could have been an amazing experience. And there still has been nothing like it. But because we didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't fund it, and we didn't manage it, it just didn't work. So after the game shipped, within the first week or so, our numbers looked pretty good. Within the first month or so, we were clearly churning players at a really alarming rate. And within the first 90 days, it was apparent that the game community was in a tailspin, and my team just didn't have the energy and the resources and the experience to pull out of it. I don't know if anybody could have, frankly. And by the way, to be very, very clear, I take the bulk of this on me. Like, this isn't on the team. I was leading the team. Joseph was leading the team. He would tell you the exact same thing. Ultimately, it falls on us, and we weren't able to pull it out. So what happened as a result of that was we didn't really have options. Like, we chased another project that would have been cool. That didn't materialize. We went looking for money, but everybody would look at our financials and say, hey, well, you're sitting on a depreciating business, like a business that's not going to be viable. So we had a hard time getting anybody to invest. We were exhausted as well, so it was hard for us to be passionate and energized. And really, ultimately, the only possibility that we had to keep the team, or the majority of the team, whole was to sell that company to Ubisoft. So we talked to them about it. They were amenable, and basically took the team on and took the game and put it into life support and let it continue running for, I think, 7 years. So as far as MMOs, that's a pretty good run, and that team that was left behind did a fantastic job of kind of polishing and building on and solidifying that base so that our earliest fans were able to actually finally get that experience that they'd been waiting on. So I'm really delighted that it turned out well in that regard. Part of the acquisition, of course, was an agreement on both sides that the founders would all leave. Things had frayed between Wolfpack executives and Ubisoft executives because of all the problems that we'd had. So it wasn't even a question of like, should we stick around? The only way to move forward for us and for them was for us to kind of go our separate way. That started a period of about a year where it was pretty much the lowest point in my life, to be completely frank. I got a divorce. We'd blown through all of the money that we had from the original company. We ate a giant piece of humble pie, learning that, you know, as smart as we were, what we were really good at doing was talking a big game, and at the end of the day, we really didn't know what we were getting into. So after about a year of kind of wallowing in self-pity, I finally found it in myself to get off my ass and do it again. Like I took that, I took all that negative emotion and negative energy, and I used it as fuel to prove, not just to the world, but really to myself, that if given another chance, I could do this. Like I could actually come up with a new vision. I could get the resources, I could manage it correctly, and I could make it great. Joseph came along, James came along. The other two guys decided they didn't want to do it, and frankly, I can't blame them. But the three of us all felt that need to go out and try it again. And we came up with an entirely new idea. That idea was Wizard 101, and once again, we were contrary to what everybody else was doing, right? We're gonna go do a kids MMO. Everybody thought we were crazy, but we had an idea and we believed that we could do it. So we went out, we started knocking on doors, and I'll be damned if we didn't find somebody out there who had the resources and the vision to go, yeah, you know what? I believe in that vision, and I believe in you guys, even if you don't believe in yourselves right now. We're gonna do it. I'm gonna give you the resources, and you're gonna get that second shot. That was KINGSISLE.